The professor's hand trembled as he held the newspaper. There on the front page was her face. The same face he had dismissed 20 years ago. The same eyes he had looked through when she raised her hand in his classroom. But now those eyes stared back at him from the cover of the most important literary publication in America. And beneath her photograph, words that would haunt him forever. Pulitzer Prize winner. He had failed her. But she had written the book that changed everything. This is that story. Let me take you back to a cold September morning in 2007. The halls of Preston University were buzzing with the energy of a new semester. Students rushed past mahogany-paneled walls lined with portraits of distinguished alumni. All white faces. All male. All dead. But in room 304, something different was about to unfold. Her name was Maya, 22 years old. First in her family to attend college. She had worked 3 jobs just to afford the application fee. Her grandmother had cleaned these very floors for 40 years, invisible to the students who walked past her every day. Maya carried her grandmother's dreams in her backpack, along with her worn copies of Baldwin, Morrison, and Hughes. She had come to study literature. She had come to learn from the best. She had no idea she was about to meet her greatest enemy. Professor Davidson stood at the front of his Advanced American Literature seminar like a king surveying his kingdom. 30 years of tenure. Author of 12 books on American literary tradition. Defender of the canon. And he had very specific ideas about who belonged in American literature. Ideas that didn't include Maya. But Maya didn't know that yet. She sat in the front row, notebook open, pen ready. Eager. Hopeful. Believing that excellence would be enough. How wrong she was. The first assignment was simple. Analyze the themes of alienation in modern American literature. Maya poured her heart onto those pages. She wrote about isolation, about being unseen, about the particular kind of loneliness that comes from existing in spaces that weren't built for you. She quoted Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. She turned in 12 pages of brilliance. Professor Davidson handed it back with a single letter written in red ink. F. No comments. No explanation. Just failure. Maya's hand shook as she stared at that grade. She had never failed anything in her life. Not once. She stayed after class. Professor Davidson, I don't understand. Could you help me see where I went wrong? He looked at her over his reading glasses. Really looked at her. And in that moment, Maya saw something in his eyes that would stay with her forever. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. Indifference. Miss Johnson, he said, his voice flat and cold. Perhaps you should consider whether this level of coursework is appropriate for someone with your background. The words hung in the air like smoke. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. My background, sir? We all have our limitations, Miss Johnson. The sooner we accept them, the happier we'll be. And if stories like this move you the way they move me, then don't just watch. Subscribe to Black Nation. Because we've got more untold stories waiting for you. Maya walked out of that classroom feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. But she didn't quit. She couldn't. Too many people were counting on her. She rewrote the paper. Tried to guess what he wanted. Made herself smaller on the page, quieter, more careful. She turned in 8 pages of perfectly acceptable mediocrity. Another F. This time there was a note. See me during office hours. Maya sat across from Professor Davidson in his book-lined office. The shelves towered around her, filled with the voices of dead white men. Hemingway stared down at her from a framed photograph. Fitzgerald smirked from another. Miss Johnson, the professor began, leaning back in his leather chair. I've been teaching for 30 years. I've seen students like you before. Students like you. You come here with certain expectations. But the truth is, not everyone is cut out for the intellectual rigor of serious literary study. There's no shame in that. Perhaps you'd be better suited for other pursuits. Other pursuits. Maya knew what he meant. He meant cleaning floors like her grandmother. He meant knowing her place. What would you suggest, Professor? Well, there's always education. Teaching elementary school, perhaps. Children can be very forgiving. The cruelty was breathtaking. Not just the words, but the way he said them. As if he were doing her a favor. As if he cared. Maya stood up. For a moment, she considered walking away. Dropping the class. Maybe even dropping out. It would be easier. Safer. But then she heard her grandmother's voice. Baby girl, they can break your body, but they can't break your spirit unless you let them. Thank you for your time, Professor Davidson. I'll see you next week. She walked out with her head high. But inside, she was dying. What Maya didn't know was that she wasn't alone. That night, she sat in the library until closing time, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers. She was trying to figure out what Professor Davidson wanted when another student approached her. Her name was Sarah. White. Blonde. From Connecticut. Everything Maya wasn't. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked. "You look like you're about to cry." Maya almost lied. Almost said she was fine. But something in Sarah's eyes stopped her. "I'm failing Professor Davidson's class. I don't understand why." Sarah sat down beside her. For a long moment, she was quiet. Then, "Can I see your papers?" Maya hesitated, but desperation made the choice for her. She handed over her failed assignments. Sarah read them in silence. When she finished, she looked stunned. "Maya, these are brilliant. Better than anything I've written. Better than anything anyone in that class has written. Then why am I failing?" Sarah's face went pale. She understood something Maya was still learning to accept. Because you're not supposed to succeed. What happened next will leave you stunned. But before we get there, make sure you subscribe. Sarah did something unexpected. Something dangerous. She went to the department head. Professor Williams was a different kind of academic. Older. Black. A veteran of civil rights battles fought in classrooms and faculty meetings. He had seen this before. He called Maya to his office. "Show me everything," he said simply. Maya spread her papers across his desk. Professor Williams read each one carefully. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "How long has this been going on?" "All semester, sir. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Professor Williams looked at her with eyes that had seen too much injustice to be surprised by more. "You're not doing anything wrong, child. The system is." He explained what Maya had been too naive to see. How certain professors operated. How they used grades as weapons. How they protected their vision of who belonged in the American literary tradition. "What can I do?" Maya asked. "Fight back. But not the way you think." Professor Williams had a plan. Maya would continue in Davidson's class. But she would also work with him privately. He would teach her what Davidson refused to. That her voice mattered. That her perspective was not a limitation but a strength. "Write the truth," he told her. "Write your truth. And let the work speak for itself." Maya spent that winter writing like her life depended on it. Because it did. She wrote about her grandmother's hands, scarred by decades of lye soap and broken dreams. She wrote about being the only black face in rooms full of white faces. She wrote about the particular exhaustion that comes from having to prove your humanity every single day. And something magical happened. The words came alive. Professor Williams read her work with tears in his eyes. "This," he said, holding up her latest essay, "is why they're afraid of you." The final assignment of the semester was a presentation. Each student would present their research on an American literary figure and argue for their place in the canon. Maya's classmates chose the usual suspects. Twain. Thoreau. Whitman. Safe choices. Expected choices. Maya chose someone else entirely. The morning of presentations, she walked into that classroom carrying a weight she had never felt before. Professor Davidson looked at her with undisguised irritation. "Miss Johnson, I trust you'll keep your presentation brief." "I'll take the full allotted time, Professor." She walked to the front of the class and began. "Today I want to talk about a writer whose work has been systematically excluded from our literary canon. A writer whose voice was silenced not because of lack of talent, but because of the color of their skin." Professor Davidson's face went white. Maya clicked to her first slide. A photograph filled the screen. An elderly black woman with eyes that held the weight of the world. Zora Neale Hurston. Born in Alabama in 1891. Anthropologist. Folklorist. Novelist. Author of Their Eyes Were Watching God. One of the most important American novels ever written. The class was dead silent. Maya could feel Professor Davidson's fury radiating from behind his desk. She continued. For 20 minutes, she dismantled every argument used to exclude black voices from American literature. She quoted Hurston's letters, her essays, her fiction. She traced the deliberate campaign to erase her from literary history. And then she did something that would haunt Professor Davidson for the rest of his life. She turned to face him directly. "Professor Davidson, in your book Guardians of the American Voice, you write that the American literary tradition is defined by its universal themes and timeless concerns. You argue that certain voices, and I quote, speak to the broader human experience while others remain trapped in the particulars of their circumstances. The professor's jaw tightened. I would argue, Maya continued, her voice steady and strong, that excluding black voices hasn't preserved the universal nature of American literature. It has diminished it. It has made it smaller, less honest, less true. The room was so quiet you could hear hearts beating. Zora Neale Hurston didn't write about black experiences. She wrote about love, loss, betrayal, hope, survival, and transformation. She wrote about what it means to be human. The fact that her characters were black doesn't make her themes less universal. It makes them more so. Maya clicked to her final slide. A quote from Hurston filled the screen. If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. She looked directly at Professor Davidson. Some of us refused to be silent. The presentation ended. The room erupted in applause. Not polite academic clapping. Real applause. Standing ovation applause. Professor Davidson sat frozen at his desk. Maya gathered her materials and walked back to her seat. She had said what needed to be said. She had spoken her truth. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. Legacies like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to Black Nation, and let's keep these stories alive together. Professor Davidson gave Maya a C+ for the semester. Not an F. Not an A. A grade designed to diminish without destroying. A grade that said, "You exist, but barely." Maya didn't care. She had found her voice. But the story doesn't end there. It had only just begun. Professor Williams encouraged Maya to submit her Hurston presentation to academic conferences, to literary journals, to anyone who would listen. The response was explosive. The essay was accepted to the American Literature Review, then reprinted in 3 other journals, then quoted in books. Maya, still an undergraduate, had started a conversation that the academic world could no longer ignore. Professor Davidson watched from his office as his student, his failed student, became the voice of a movement. Maya graduated with honors, not from Davidson's class, but from the university. She went on to graduate school, then to a PhD program, then to a professorship of her own. And she never stopped writing. Her first book, Voices from the Margins, Reclaiming the American Literary Canon, won the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her second book, The Grandmother's Hands, a literary memoir, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Her third book won it. 20 years after Professor Davidson told her she wasn't cut out for serious literary study, Maya Johnson stood on the stage at Columbia University, accepting the most prestigious award in American letters. In her acceptance speech, she said, "This prize belongs to my grandmother, who cleaned floors so I could read books. It belongs to Zora Neale Hurston, whose voice refused to be silenced. And it belongs to every student who has ever been told they don't belong." She paused. Excellence has no color. Truth has no boundaries. And the American story is bigger than any one person's vision of what it should be. Professor Davidson was in the audience that night. He had come, he told himself, out of professional curiosity. He watched his former student, the one he had tried to break, accept the highest honor his field could bestow. And for the first time in 30 years, he understood the true cost of his prejudice. Maya Johnson is now one of the most respected literary scholars in America. She holds an endowed chair at Yale University. Her books are taught in classrooms around the world. Her voice, the voice Professor Davidson tried to silence, has become part of the American literary canon she once fought to enter. She never mentioned Professor Davidson by name in her books or speeches. She didn't need to. Her success was indictment enough. But the story has one final twist. 5 years ago, Professor Davidson, now retired and forgotten, wrote her a letter. He had cancer, he said. Not long to live. He wanted to apologize. Maya never answered that letter. She didn't know him forgiveness. She didn't know him closure. She didn't know him anything. Instead, she established a scholarship fund at Preston University, the Maya Johnson Fellowship for Students of Color in Literary Studies. Every year, it sends 10 students to graduate school. Students who might otherwise be told they don't belong. Students like her grandmother's granddaughter. This was only the beginning. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Hit that subscribe button to stay with us till the end. The plaque in the English department reading room tells the story simply. Dedicated to the voices that refuse to be silenced. In honor of Maya Johnson, class of 2007, Pulitzer Prize winner, 2015. Professor Davidson's name appears nowhere on that plaque. His books are gathering dust on forgotten shelves. His vision of American literature, narrow, exclusive, afraid, died with him. But Maya's voice lives on. In every student who refuses to be silenced. In every classroom where forgotten voices are finally heard. In every book that expands our understanding of what it means to be human. She was supposed to fail. The system was designed to break her. Professor Davidson was supposed to win. But Maya had something he didn't understand. Something he couldn't grade or diminish or destroy. She had the truth. And the truth, as Maya learned that cold September morning so many years ago, has a way of making itself heard. So the next time someone tells you that you don't belong, that your voice doesn't matter, that your story isn't worth telling, remember Maya Johnson. Remember the professor who failed the black girl. And remember that she wrote the book anyway. We tell our stories for us by us. Subscribe to Black Nation, join the community, and let's make sure these voices are never silenced. Maya Johnson's story reminds us that excellence cannot be contained. That talent will find a way. That the American dream, the real American dream, belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. Her grandmother cleaned those floors for 40 years. Maya now walks those halls as one of the most celebrated scholars in America. That's not just a success story. That's a revolution. And it started with a young black woman who refused to let a failing grade define her future. The professor failed her. But she wrote the book that changed everything. And that book is still being written today.